Welcome to the Best Animation category of the R-Anime Awards. This category celebrates the artistry and technical prowess of anime animation. From breathtaking action sequences to imaginative world building, the animation in these shows brings characters to life and transports us to fantastical worlds. This category recognizes the hard work of animators and directors who create something truly remarkable. Enjoy the incredible animation on display. Here are your nominees for Best Animation of 2022.
友達がいっぱいいっぱいいっぱいできる承認欲求モンスターいいねくれ
コン
ツリーハウスかお泊まりするの久しぶりですそれじゃあ2人はベッド使って葵さんは私は毛布持ってきて床で寝るからそんなこと
And your jury winner is Yamano Susume, Next Summit. And the winner for the public is Bocchi the Rock.
Joining me to talk about Best Animation is Panda Avenger.
Hello.
Panda is once host, website warlord. Once had his animation viewed by Hiromi Wakabayashi.
Oh, because I posted it on Reddit, but
He must have seen it. And also joining us is Addy from the jury, Addy MG.
Hi.
Me and Addy,
yeah.
Me and Addy went to see
Listen.
Makia in person together, and he left me alone.
I did not leave you alone.
You left me alone.
We talked for like 20 minutes, and then you dropped me off at like a fucking metro station or something.
No, you
a
had
bus stop actually.
You had a different seat in the movie theater.
Oh yeah, that is true. That is true.
Oh, that's a stranger. But you know what's not a stranger? Yamada Susume and Bocchi the Rock, which both won our Best Animation awards. Now, what I have to notice here is that Bocchi is second place in animation. How close was this divide? What actually made Yamada Susume, do y'all think?
So
beat it
actually, this was like really close. I think the vote ended up being 4-3 in favor of Yamano Susume. I was one of the people who voted Bocchi first, but I can explain the reasoning why people liked Yamano Susume better. So we had like a really long argument about variety in animation and consistency in animation, and both these shows like excel in these departments. Like Yamano Susume has like so the character designer for Yamano Susume, known as Yusuke Matsuo as well as Fugo, he has a philosophy where he just lets animators take their own style and put it on the characters. And this is why like every episode of Yamano Susume has a different design philosophy, basically different designs, and characters move. The movement of the characters is it's very realistic to their personalities. It characterizes them well, but the actual look of the show changes up slightly. But that like it varies constantly. But that variation level is it's in a limited barometer, you could say. Whereas Bocchi, as we all know, is like completely insane, and keeps like it can go from 0 to 100 in a second, and the gags all distort, and there's a lot of mixed media usage and stuff like that. So there is that. So we could say both these shows are like really variable. But what happens is Bochi ends up being slightly inconsistent as the season goes on, because as we all know, it had a very troubled production, and the the team were pulling like all nighters to finish it. Like the last episode was finished like a day before the season aired, whereas Yamano Susume was finished months beforehand. Some episodes were prepared like 2 to 3 years ago. It's that big of a difference, and which is why the Yamano Susume basically has consistently nice animation almost throughout, except for like a couple of episodes where it's rough, slightly by its standards, but otherwise it's like really good all the way. Bochi, on the other hand, you could feel like after episode 8 that the team is just hanging out by strings essentially. Even before, he had moments like in episode 4 where they visit the market and you can see like they essentially do a slideshow where the character drawings are very rough, and even the background, the layouts are pretty rough. Stuff like that, you can see that they're not at their best. The other problem for Bochi was the performance scenes. A lot of people found them to be a valiant effort, but still quite robotic for like what they wanted. They used CG assistants and drew on top of the CG assistants. Can you hear some like a truck going by?
No, you're fine, Addy.
Okay, cool. So they use CG assistants and rotoscoping for the performance scenes, which essentially ended up creating some moments which felt more robotic to the jury than what we would have liked to see in a live rock performance, essentially. And that is why, that is one of the main reasons why Bochi was just slightly held back as compared to Yamano Susume, which was almost always breathing with life. And even when you have like distant models, right? When you compare the philosophy of both these shows for the distance models, Bochi is like really quite detailed, even at like a distance level. You have these, you have the intricate, what should I say, accessories of the characters, which still stands out, and it feels like the line is thicker because what they do is they take up a big drawing and then they shrink it down to fit it in at the distance level. Whereas what Yamano Susume does is that it draws dot face characters which look very natural. Their posing is very natural and they fit their environment better. So that kind of thing makes the animation more alive. It makes it feel more authentic, essentially, to their personalities. These are the kind of things why I won out as.
What are your thoughts on Yamano Susume versus Bochi, Panda?
I haven't watched a lot of the last season of Yamano Susume.
Meaning you watched like a third of it.
Sure.
No, because of the way that it's retelling the beginning.
Yeah.
It is very easy to see what Adi is saying, especially in regards to
to be honest, go on.
Oh yeah. Sort of how like the characters in Yamano Susume like move compared to Bochi. There's almost a sort of like authenticity and bounciness to how they move. Whereas there are points in Bochi where it falls flat. But like Bochi is just still so amazing as well, so I can see why these two were sort of just neck and neck for first place. I am a little curious if some of the more unorthodox stuff that Bochi did, I'm not going to count the Unity physics engine thing as animation, but like the stop motion.
We counted the blender thing. We counted the blender test, actually. We counted almost everything that they did, except for maybe the live action scene, but even that some people brought up as it being a funny gag. But we counted every kind of mixed media usage because at the end of the day, it is animation, even if it's unorthodox for what anime is. So that's why we considered all of that. We didn't really consider the technicality of it, more that did the technique fit the gag and did it enhance it in a way, a more traditional way would have been worse or not. In that kind of manner, we analyzed the scenes. And we felt that Bochi pretty much knocked it out of the park every time. Went for an avant-garde
Gotcha.
mixed media approach. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Now-
those definitely would differentiate it from Yamano Susume at the
Mhm.
very least.
I mean, actually, there are a couple of scenes in Yamano Susume which are very much like that. Like if you compare the Ikarashi scenes of Bochi and Yamano Susume, you'll see he goes way all out on Yamano Susume as opposed to his Bochi scene. His Bochi scene is very restrained. It's just like a bit where Bochi is being burned as a witch, if you remember that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in his Yamano Susume scene, he goes completely wild. He draws the characters like basically like Shinchan knockoff characters, and then he does like a whole 1 minute acting scene with that. And then the other part of that scene is he draws them in like a crayon coloring style, which is like
Oh.
they do a flashback. So it is, yeah. There is a lot of variety in Yamano Susume as well. So it's not lacking in that department. Also, one point I wanted to bring up was the recaps. That the recaps actually had stuff before the episode as well. So, basically a 3 minute scene before each recap, and they had some of the best highlights of the season, especially episode 4 with the roller coaster scene. That scene is amazing. I think you might have seen it in the if you've seen the Mad I made for on Reddit. I featured that pretty prominently. Yeah, and that scene is pretty incredible.
Now, while Bochi and Yamada Susume are pretty relatively close to each other in each individual ranking, there's one that's a little more separate, which is Chainsaw Man. And now, a kind of recurring thing about Chainsaw Man has been the kind of weird thing about the director saying he wanted to go for a more realistic live action kind of feel, and then the audience saying that, mostly manga readers really being disappointed, but then it always consistently ends up being high in our awards. What are you guys feeling on Chainsaw Man's animation in this season?
I think the people disappointed in Chainsaw Man do not vote on the Reddit awards. Firstly, secondly, the problem with Chainsaw Man's animation, it's very ambitious. I will say that it's very ambitious. It's trying to be really realistic and grounded. The problem is that the schedule is terrible, and the team does not have the backbone to essentially carry out that realistic vision. Because a lot of the times when they're trying to do realistic action, the drawings essentially melt. Like they have like a gopher face of the like you see the scene where Aki's crying in like episode 10. He looks like a gopher because his face just kind of melts as he's crying, and it's like it's terrible. And there are scenes where like a character is like taking off a shirt, and the shirt like pulls off it like halfway through her hand and then comes back again, and some scenes where a hand like moves through another character's face. There's like every episode essentially has moments where it's like, yeah, you're trying to be realistic, but you cannot even do basic things right. So that's going to be a problem, which is why the ambition kind of falls flat. But there's a lot of good stuff. I wouldn't say that Chainsaw Man is like without merit. I can see why people like it. There's a lot of fun action. The attempt to actually go for a realistic style is quite brave, and when it works really well. Like if you remember the morning scene where Aki's like drinking a cup of coffee, and that scene is pretty incredible. Even the scenes which actually really melt are kind of interesting. For example, if you remember the scene in episode 8 where like you see it from Hino's perspective, where she's like drunkenly walking and like dropping Denji off. Yeah, the first person shot. Denzi's body is completely melting, but because the shot is so ambitious, that it still feels kind of interesting, just because of what it was trying to do. So that's why I can see why people like Chainsaw Man. It's just like from our perspective as a jury, we have to take into account its technical deficiencies, and which is why it ends up being so low. Because like all the 10 shows are like really good, right? So you have to judge them based on how well they did what they were trying to set out to do, and Chainsaw Man falls flat on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a big Chainsaw Man fan before the anime came out. And I mean, I ended up enjoying the anime a lot. Despite the melting, it was almost like there's some parts where I was like just able to ignore it because I was like, oh, my favorite scene's being animated, or this is really hype, you know. But I think it is really easy to see like there's sort of a difference in how the opening is directed versus the rest of the show, where the show seems to have a more constrained vision of what theatrical and cinematic compared to the opening, which is able to do a lot of more bombastic things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I thought I would say a lot of that is on the cinematography side of things, and the animation does do what it's trying to do. So I personally didn't hold it against that, but yeah, it is quite restrained for what Chainsaw Man could be, and the opening is essentially a statement piece of, yeah, this is what it should have been, but it is not.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of whenever you see like an actor with a bad accent in a movie, like they say hello and they go, "Hello, governor, my name's Anne Hathaway," and a lot of the times it's not necessarily due to the actor like being unskilled. It's that they had like no time and no proper coaching in order to actually attain what they were looking for. So I find that comparison really poignant in the case of Chainsaw Man because, as you said, it's very ambitious, right? But speaking of bombasticity, that is a word. um, year after year, I kind of find it hard to square how one can judge such different entries within a category. Because when you say animation, right? I mean, some years people kind of bring up the fact that maybe we should split animation and character acting animation, right? Because it's so different. How do you find it comparing one with the other? So something like, say, Demon Slayer has this like crazy like fighting scenes and action in that way, as compared to something like Do It Yourself, where she crashes into a pole and that's pretty much all the action you get.
I feel like that's a very poor distinction to make, because like even Chainsaw Man, if you see, Chainsaw Man has a lot of character acting, which like makes the characters like bring themselves to life, like that brings the characters to life, right? And if you have something like Cyberpunk, which like there is a lot of fun action stuff, but the character action or like is what like brought it to my attention, at least, where stuff like David's fidgeting leg is it characterizes his nervousness and his like angry young man a status, which I felt like was very interesting, and how like Rebecca always like moves in like very lopsided ways because of how her weight is balanced and stuff
As
like that.
expected of Trigger, right?
Yeah. The Trigger is very pose heavy, and they try to go for acting which is more fun and characterful like that. So which is why I felt like the show has a lot of good action as well. So if we divide it, we are basically dividing its appeal in half, and I don't feel like that's a worth it thing to go through. And even for like you mentioned Do It Yourself has like a lot of things that you would call action. Actually, like you have scenes where a girl essentially parkours through her building, like tumbles through a tree and like jumps across to a taller skyscraper, and that's like on a level which is beyond anything in Chainsaw Man. There's a bunch of hardcore run scenes. So it's stuff like that. That is action animation. It is presenting you the character acting as well, but it is action.
And I think like you can even combine the two.
Yeah.
We actually haven't talked about the number three ranking for Jury, Princess Connect. But
Yeah.
there's so much like flourishes and like little expressions that characters do when they are fighting, like
100% agree.
that like really show their personality. It actually has been a while since it aired at the start of the season, but like I think the way Pecorine does her Princess Strikes, like the way characters just move during intense action scenes in Princess Connect, like it's almost cutesy. It's not like serious, but like it's still a very impressive technically and also action heavy scene. But they really show their characters through it, which I think is really something special about Princess Connect. Not in that it's unique in doing that, but like how it does it so well. And we don't
this is
really
something we actually.
Oh, sorry.
I was saying this is something we actually discussed like in the jury properly with one specific animator standing out. His name is Takeshi Mainami. He essentially mixes like heavy smearing, like that's his style. It's very distinctive, very bold smearing. And so he will go from a scene where he's like a character is like knocking somebody off, and at the next moment they'll fall through and their face falls, and so that becomes like a scene which goes from action to comedy character acting, right? So that's the kind of stuff which Prince Connect excels at, and he is like one guy who's like really knocking it out of the park in that department.
Yeah, I know we don't count openings in animation, but something that really sticks out to me in Princess Connect is when there's like basically a pan over the entire cast in the opening, and it's like they're on frame for 2 seconds, but you can see each personality of the characters with the way they move just really, really well. And I think that's emblematic of the entire series. I just think the opening does it really well.
It's not just the opening though. There's the scene in episode 4 where they're like looking at the map, and there's like 8 characters standing in front of the map, and all of them map together, and their faces move in different ways as they look down and figure out what is happening. And that scene is incredible. If you remember that one,
yeah.
Another.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
I was just agreeing with Eddie.
Oh, you're fine. You're allowed to agree with Eddie. I know it's hard sometimes. Now, Eddie knows what he's talking about. But just to bring up something else, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this because, speaking as someone who isn't that knowledgeable about the industry and about the technical aspect behind animation, right? I'm a little confused at exactly why the public thinks Demon Slayer has such good animation because it's a meme by this point, right? Oh my god, Ufotable! They want to give Ufotable like every anime. Why did it place last on the jury side? Are you saying the animation isn't actually that technically impressive?
The animation is fine. I don't want to talk about Yaiba, but okay, I talk about Yaiba.
I mean, it's there.
Okay, I talk about Yaiba. So there's many problems with Yaiba, but the first problem we had as a jury with Yaiba was that the thing people like about Demon Slayer is the effects animation, right? There's all the fire effects and the water effects for the breathing stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff that made the series stand out and what people like about it, and all the crazy rotations and stuff. That's the kind of things people expect from the show, and it kind of delivers on that in this season. But there's a lot of like bad CG stock effects, like. If you remember Uzui, the sound guy, like the ninja guy, right? He does sound breathing, and every time he does sound breathing, they fucking throw fireworks, which is directly out of an After Effects library, and it is so terrible. I just like every time I see it, I feel like, what the fuck are they doing? They should not be doing this. They are a proper animation studio. They should not be doing this. But yeah. They used like stock effects for Uzui scenes, which do not feel at the heights of what the series can achieve and did achieve in season 1 essentially. There is also the character acting in Kimetsu no Yaiba is just bad. It's just bad. So there's moments where like somebody is crying, and instead like their whole body just stiffens up, and like just the upside of their shoulders move while they're crying, and it's like the rest of the body is like a mute statue, and just the shoulders move, and it's like, okay, this guy is crying, and it's like, no, that's not crying. You're not showing any emotion. You're not showing any personality for the guy. And
I'm remembering the Nezuko scene where she almost looks like a puppet. Like, I don't know, it's hard to describe.
Yeah, so the guy I'm talking about is the father of the fire guy, the Kyujuru's father. I don't remember his name. But yeah, he. This is a scene which happens in episode 1. It was so bad. I was like, this show is. Why do people like it? But at the end of the day, there's a 6-episode fight scene, which is why people like it. And every episode has a big fight moment where they turn around in slow motion and they fucking cut off the head of the villain. It's like boom. Yeah, that's why people like it. There's a lot of flashy effects. There's a lot of slow motion turns which look cool. There's a lot of crazy camera work which is happening, which makes it look like there's a lot of movement, and it's just like characters being slid around in a fucking CG camera plane. I don't want to talk about Yaiba.
What are your thoughts on Yaiba, Panda?
I remember like sort of having one thought, because like Adi said, Yaiba's really enjoyable. The action is good when it hits, but I remember having one thought, sort of watching our montage reel, um, is that like it almost lacks a little bit of clarity. And in part, this is like, on the compositing work done afterward, where there's like so many special effects layered on top of it. Um, but sometimes the action is almost deafened by the amount of effects on screen, and I don't mean like effects animation, but like the glare and the glow. Uh, where
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Speaking of the montage, I assume they use the scene by Nozomu Abe where like the character is screaming, like he's static and screaming, and they keep moving to a increasingly more close-up scene of the character screaming, and it looks so goofy. It looks so stupid. But like, yeah, there's a bit where he turns around his sword at the start, which is cool. After that, they're literally just static characters screaming at each other, and it goes increasingly closer and closer to their faces. It looks so dumb and it does not move. I have no idea why people think this is good, but yeah, that people wanted me to put the scene in the MAD, and I was like, no, this is not happening. This is terrible. I will use some other scene which looks half right possible, and that's fine. But that is like the most upvoted scene on Sakuga Boru for the show, the close up one, and I'm like, why? I have no clue why.
Yeah,
Now,
I think that for as much as I do like Yaiba's animation, there's just maybe a lack of variety is almost a good way to put it, because there's the slow-mo and the really impressive 3D turns, but then when you get to the slow-mo, it is almost like they're standing still, and you don't get the opportunity to um, have the characters express as much, like in Princess Connect, because they're in slow motion, so they literally can't emote as much. And then it goes into a flurry of blows, which looks sick as hell, but you also don't have the opportunity to have them emote as much. You do see a lot of fun facial expressions during that when they're really relishing the fight, but because it's a flurry of blows, now they're moving so fast, it's hard to see that expressiveness in how they fight. So it does sort of almost hamstring itself a little bit in how it likes to animate its fights.
Yeah, the key poses don't stand out. Like if you see the fights in Cyberpunk, for example, in Cyberpunk's episode 3, they have like a big fight, and the end of that fight, there's like a crazy blood scene, right? Where to show that how the intense the pattern of the blood falling is, they show it from like three different angles, and every angle looks so unique, and like the pose sticks out in your mind. That's something which like which has staying power. Whereas something like Yaiba, it just like slashes through, as you're saying, through a rapid cuts of scenes, which looks impressive in the moment, but it doesn't stick with you in a way. That
now, in the back of my mind, I always knew Yaiba was gonna maybe place a little lower on the jury side, just based on what you value. But I'm surprised to see Do It Yourself kind of middling in the middle there. I actually really thought it was a top three contender. What exactly happened to make it fall so low?
Uh, when we entered the jury, I think Do It Yourself and Mob Psycho we were a lot higher on than they ended up being at the end. Do It Yourself for the first six seasons, for the first six episodes, sorry, is incredible. There's a lot of good character animation which like brings the characters' personalities out. But sorry, like right after episode 6, the beach episode, which is like the biggest flex possible, which is handled by Fugo himself, the animation just becomes a lot stiffer. The characters moments, like they're just slideshows essentially, that like they still show the character's personality, which is why it places so high, but they're not as lively and as weighty as they used to be in the first six episodes. The mechanical animation is nice throughout the show, so like the moments where they're doing the DIY bits, right, that's what I'm calling the mechanical animation, that is really thorough throughout the show. But the character acting bits, which is what made the show so enjoyable at the start, that dips around like the episode 7 mark, and it stays dipped till like basically episode 10, and the last two episodes are good again. So which is why the show kind of fell a lot for the jury.
Can you explain what you mean by the beach episode being a flex?
So the beach episode has like a lot of moments. So there's this moment when they bring out their swimsuits, right? Takumin is a character who's known for being very shy. So when before she pulls out a swimsuit, she like puts her up her hands together and like very meekly says that, hey, I also brought my swimsuit. So the way her hand moves during that scene, it shows off her personality so well. It Like her arms essentially elongate, like her hand essentially elongates to what her design is, and that kind of idiosyncratic drawing brings out the personality a lot better than something like Stephen, which was on model, right? So that is what we're talking about when we say a flex. There are other moments like the run I was talking about. There's a lot of runs. The biggest run happens in this episode between she and the president. They just have a full-on 100-meter dash, and the volume in the drawings when that happens is incredible. There's like a lot of attention paid to the thighs, a lot of attention paid to their hips as they turn, and when they're crashing, there's a close up with every second their arms move in and the faces curve together. It feels like they're crashing in, as opposed you can compare something like this where both the characters are essentially merging in together when they're closing up, as opposed to something like a scene, the Yaiba scene, where it's cutting between two different close-ups. So there's not as much intensity as it is when they're both together on the same screen and they're mushing together, and that's why that scene is really cool as well. So yeah, it's moments like that. It's like a lot of really fun character acting, a lot of really fun action. It's basically a whole 24 minutes of incredible animation.
Panda, as someone of animation experience, like how can you explain just how tedious or tough doing something like that would be?
I just draw animations as a hobby occasionally.
No, you're a full-fledged animator. Panda,
but God, I wish. But also I don't wish, considering the
state of the industry.
I'm quite happy with my actual day job, but I think it's just insanely impressive to me how fast they get these drawings out and how good they look doing it. Because as someone who just does it as a hobby, I have to think about anatomy. I have to think about when I want to break anatomy, to emphasize motion, and those are things, for me, it's stuff I like really, really consciously think about. And I think looking at how professional animators work, it's almost second nature to them, or at least they don't have to map it out like I do. So I find them being able to almost break anatomy in order to make drawings more expressive. That's the most impressive stuff to me, especially with human bodies, because we have so many parts in our bodies, so it's so hard to first simplify it, but still make it recognizable to human eyes, and then make that move. It's probably just why I love animation as a whole so much in the first place, being able to do that with anything and make it come to life.
And I think that's a great note to end on. So I want to thank our wonderful guests, Panda Venture and Addy.
It was nice hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, it's great talking with y'all.
Now, Panda is probably going to cringe into the universe because I was going to plug his Pixiv, but instead, I think you guys should go to animeawards.moe at the end of the stream, because that is Panda's pride and joy, and it's also our pride and joy, and we're really happy that we could have someone like him working on it.
Please don't go on my Pixiv. I'm begging you.
Pro animator Panda Venger X. And thanks, you guys. We're going to move on to the next category. See ya.